Welcome to session 3 of my creation course. And last week we looked at session 2 and the importance of Genesis. We found that the New Testament references to Genesis always take Genesis as historical fact, never allegorical. Also, Genesis is foundational to our Christian belief. One thing I did forget to mention was the author of Genesis. It's Moses, because he wrote the first 5 books. Now, the last 4 books of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, Moses was there. He was he was current to the time that he was talking about. But the first book, Genesis, happened thousands years before he was in existence. So how would he know what to write about? I mean, I know God can certainly tell him what happened, but there is another thing that's interesting in the book of Genesis is the word Toledoth, which in Hebrew, from Hebrew, means these are the generations of. There are natural divisions in the book of Genesis. In these Toledoths, these are the generations of Adam, these are the generations of Noah, these are the generations of Isaac. So they're all there. There's, I think, 7 of them. I forget exactly. But these are probably things that are handed down generation from generation. So Moses would have had access to these Toledoths, and each one starts a new section of Genesis. So that was probably the best way that Moses got the information for Genesis. Now, as I promised last time, we're going to look at the science of creation now. Now, there's a thing called a scientific method, which says you have a question that you want answered. So you'll do some research, then you'll set up a hypothesis, a theory of how things might have looked, and then you do an experiment. Then after the experiment, you gather your data, you do an analysis, and you form a conclusion. Now that's the basis for operational science. However, that part we cannot observe. We cannot do the experiments. We cannot see what happened. That's beyond the scope of operational science. So both evolutionists and creationists have to look at forensic science, which is just like CSI. It's something that happened in the past, but there's evidence ongoing today, and both evolution and creation are presented with identical facts. However, the viewpoint changes. It's the same as if you're in a courtroom and you have the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney, and they both have the same facts but come at it from a different viewpoint. Both of these, mind you, creation and evolution, have to be taken by faith because no one was there to actually see what was going on. So on that basis, we're going to look at the forensic science aspect of it. Let's begin with the beginning, and let me read to you Genesis 1:1-5. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, there was morning, the first day. Now, God existed long before this happened because God is infinite. He had no beginning, he has no end. Now, in the Greek and Hebrew both, there's the definite article, the, which means the one and only. So when we say the beginning, it's the one and only beginning. There's no other. Time began at creation. Light that we have was revealed. It was never created. The word in the Hebrew is actually revealed, like a curtain opening to see the light. And that light is God himself. We see in Revelation 22:5, and night will be no more. They will need no light of the lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. So that light that was in the beginning will also be at the end. Now, if you look at the words that they defined it, evening and morning, the first day, that day is defined right there and there. Some folks will say that yom, which is the Hebrew word for day, means unspecified time, and that is true. It does mean that. But as soon as you put a qualifier in there, like evening and morning, or so many days, or whatever, then it becomes actual days, a 24-hour cycle, the time it takes for the earth to revolve once around its axis. Now, evolutionists and liberal theologians will say that the earth is billions of years old. Now, I've always wondered, well, why would they say that? And it occurred to me that the evolutionist viewpoint says that we evolved from lesser creatures to more advanced creatures, and fish developed arm-like fins and eventually walked on the earth. So, to me, that sounds very fanciful. If you say it happened over a period of a few days, well, that would be completely unfathomable for me. But you add to it billions of years and millions of changes in that time, and yes, maybe, possibly, something could evolve into something else. But there's absolutely no evidence of anything ever evolving into something else. In fact, fossils that are supposedly 300 million years old, like the crocodile, still look like a crocodile 300 million years later. So there's absolutely no changes in that. Now, some like to put a gap between day one and day two to kind of meld the evolutionary thinking and creation thinking. And they insert billions of years between day one and day two. Now, that is a way for them to try to explain why we have fossils. So their claim is that pre-Adamic, before Adam, the world that was destroyed by Lucifer's flood, which is why that the earth was formless and void and covered in water in day one. That's their thought. And then one thing that kind of led people astray is in the King James, the word is replenish in Genesis 1:28. Replenish the earth, which kind of assumes that there was something else before that needs to be replenished. However, that word is mistranslated. It never meant to be replenished. It was always meant to be fill. So, bara is a Hebrew word meaning to create, and only God creates. So in Genesis 1:1, he created heaven and earth. In Genesis 1:21, he created animal and breath. In Genesis 1:27, he creates man. These are all things that never existed before. Now back to this Lucifer's flood theory, which says the earth was destroyed by a flood between day one and day two, but everything that God created, he said, was very good. So Satan must also have been very good, at least until day 6. And any gap theory puts death before the fall. Yet God said that everything, at least up to day 6, was good. So death is not good. So that cannot possibly go. It flies in the face of what God calls good. Now, like I said, the evolutionists put the Earth at 4.5 billion years old. Okay, so biblically, if you go through the genealogies and everything else, you come up to around 6,000 years, which is a far cry from the billions that they claim it to be. Now, where do they get their billions of years? Well, they do it by radiometric dating, which is supposedly very accurate. However, the half-life of carbon-14, which is one of the common methods to date, especially carbon-based things, is 5,780 years. Now, so carbon-14 has been found in fossils that are supposedly millions of years old. Now, how could carbon-14 last that long if it's only got a half-life of 5,780 years? It keeps going down to nothing very quickly. So coal, for instance, supposedly 300 million years old, there's carbon-14 in that. The other thing that kind of a pain in the neck for evolutionists is soft tissue, which has been recently discovered in the past few years in fossils, and soft tissue will never last for millions of years. Now, I came across an interesting article in Apologetics Press, Inc., and they come up with the problems of radiometric dating. There's all of these dating techniques are dependent on assumption. So assumption number 1 that they list here is the rate of decay has always been the same. Well, that's kind of an assumption, well, really. And you cannot definitely say that the rate of decay has always been the same. Second assumption, elements have not been affected by outside forces. Well, what if there was a catastrophe? Things change real quick. So that assumption doesn't really hold water either. Assumption number 3 is that there's no daughter elements existing at the beginning. The daughter element is what's left of the decaying parent element. So the assumption number 3 is that there's no daughter element existing in the beginning. If there was, it would skew their readings completely. There's another problem with radiometric dating, and that is that different techniques produce different results, varying often in millions of years. So you can't really trust it, and yet people put their whole faith in these radiometric datings. Now, in 1954, New Zealand had an eruption, and one of the common methods of radiometric dating is potassium to argon, and that's the one that's supposed to give you millions of years. Anyway, they tested the 1954 lava flow from that volcano in New Zealand, and it came out to 270,000 to 290,000 years, when in actuality it was happened in 1954. So again, we have so many different variables that they teach as fact, and yet there's nothing that you can concretely say that evolution is true. Their dating techniques are up for grabs based on assumption. So to me, the best way to look at the age of the earth is from a biblical perspective. God was there. He knows exactly when it happened. You follow the timelines through and you'll come up to about 6,000 years, not more. And some have put it even at 10,000, but that is really, really stretching it because there's no evidence for that either. Some claim there's gaps in the genealogical record, but again, in Luke, we have the genealogy of Jesus tracing back to Adam, and each one is important and each one is their real person. There's nothing missed. So there you have it. But now, to finish off today's session, God is outside of time. He created time when he created the world. And the light that was there the first 3 days, was God himself. The light revealed. It was never created. Water was there as implied creation. It never says it was created, but it was there mentioned because water covered the entire earth. And in that first chapter of Genesis, he calls the day an evening and a morning. And there's the end of day one. Okay, so he defines it. There's no more guesswork as to how long that day is. Evening and morning is very clear. And then man created on day 6, not after billions of years, because the ages just cannot be verified that way. All these billions of years are based on assumptions. So there we have it. And next time we'll look at day 2. And each day gets more and more interesting. Looking forward to it. Thank you for watching.